Good morning, Chairman Scott, Vice Chairman, Commissioners, and Commissioner staff. My name is Laurie Trevor-Deutsch, and I am the President of TNW Wireless. To my left is Benoit Laliberté, Chief Executive Officer. TNW truly appreciates the opportunity to be here and to have participated in this review of the Canadian competitive framework over the last year. But before we get into our presentation, I'd like to state something on a personal level, which we feel is very obvious, though to our surprise, we believe that it's been lost on most, if not all, of the interveners. We are here for the simple fact that Canadians own the airwaves. We as Canadians provide access to spectrum to organizations such as cellular carriers, which essentially act as fiduciaries for Canadians and their resources. And as fiduciaries, we are charged with the responsibility of developing this national resource for the benefit of Canadians. We believe that the Commission is the custodian of this national resource, and we appreciate that the Commission has to constantly wrestle between the often conflicting objectives of allowing Canadians to have affordable wireless services while at the same time creating conditions for carriers as fiduciaries to invest in high-quality networks, again for the benefit of Canadians. I have to say on a personal level, I was a bit surprised at the anger of some of the interveners at having to participate in this consultation, an attitude which seems to me to be a bit inappropriate. The national incumbents would have you believe that everything is just fine. The Canadians have a great network and fierce competition, and this represents the nirvana of wireless scenarios. There is a sense of, why are we here again? Everything is fine. On the other end of the spectrum are the potential MVNOs, who are telling you that all they need is unfettered access to national networks, but they should not have any responsibility for contributing to the Canadian wireless infrastructure. And if they get what they want, the Canadians will see great prices and better service. In the middle are groups like us, the regional competitors, that are asking for the opportunity to contribute to the national network, but need an appropriate competitive framework and regulatory certainty to make the investments needed, because regional carrier profits are nowhere near that of the national incumbents. Over the next 20 minutes, we hope to provide the Commission with what we believe to be the best balance of competition and industry incentive, which we believe will be the most beneficial to Canadians and which will allow Canadians to receive what we refer to as a public dividend for their spectrum. That public dividend being the proper balance between price and quality. I do believe we can offer some unique perspectives on the matter, and furthermore, we can provide practical examples of what studies like those of the Competition Bureau can only describe at a macro level. With this background, I ask my colleague Benoit to continue.
Thank you, Laurie. As the Commission is well aware, through our current submission and through our Part 1 application of July 3rd, 2017, TNW Wireless have been trying to develop a regional wireless presence for some time. It is not a secret that Bell and TELUS do not want us in business. And with each attempt to enter, they have found ways to block us or stall us, either through direct interference in our business plan, in our business strategies, in our business transactions, or by denying us mandated roaming services. Since the decision related to our Part 1 application was cited as one of the reasons that the Commission launched this consultation, I would like to think that we have helped, in some small way, to bring the urgency of the situation to the Commission. Now I would like to be clear, very clear. We completely agree that issues under consideration in this proceeding have the potential to significantly alter investment plan, network upgrades, deployment going forward for all mobile network operators. It is therefore critical that the Commission maintain a wireless framework that focuses on putting forward the sustainable facility-based competition policy on which TNW and the other wireless carrier have been relying on for our investment decision and on which it's necessary for us to continue to rely in the future. To this end, our bottom line is that we urge the Commission not to regulate any mandated full MVNO access regime. We do not believe there's any evidence of a competitive need to do so, nor is there any evidence that mandated full MVNO access will bring the benefit that Canadian and the Commission are seeking. In the Canadian context, we firmly believe that mandating full MVNO will result in, quote, a race to the bottom, and Canadians will not see the full public dividend from their resources. That is the balance of price and quality. In fact, in few areas where we actually agree with Bell, TELUS, and Rogers, is that mandating full MVNO access for non-mobile network operators will have an adverse effect on the investment and deployment of our respective networks. We also cannot agree more with Shaw, Videotron, Eastlink, that such mandated access would cut the grass under our feet at this very critical junction of our respective operations. We firmly believe that mandating an MVNO regime would have significant negative impact on facility-based competitor and will impede the future of the Canadians' wireless services. We are a small company, and yet we own and maintain spectrum, we maintain wireless infrastructure. Why in the world would we or any other company make such an investment if we could simply piggyback on a mandated basis and then run a marketing company with minimal capital investment, no risk, and no responsibility? Big question mark. We believe, therefore, that the Commission effort should be to clarify policy and to reduce barriers for facility-based provider so we can continue to grow our business without having to fight with the incumbent at every turn. Because this is where really the problem lies. Those who are pushing full MVNO are doing so for convenience only. They are requesting the Commission to grant them access to a full MVNO type regime because they see this as a quick and low-risk addition to their current business model, which may or may not work for them. These telecom reseller and independent internet service provider essentially made the decision 1 or 2 decades ago to not invest in spectrum or in facility-based wireless services, and are now essentially seeking the Commission to assist them to fix their past errors. They have made similar mistake with the internet resale business, not to invest into their last-mile infrastructure, and to simply resell someone else's network services on the wireline. The Commission already gave them a great deal of relief in this area and should not be expected to constantly wave a magic wand to fix their business model. That is not the job of the Commission, nor the goal of these proceedings. The only argument that proponents of full MVNO are making is just that Canadians are paying too much for their wireless services, and they claim to have the magic solution. They imply that the existing regional small operators do not have a solution. In fact, under the proper environment, we do. We believe, and the Commission Bureau's findings support this argument, that regional facility-based mobile network operators with licensed spectrum truly have the ability to compete effectively against the big three and provide Canadians with the public dividend they are entitled to. Laurie?
Yeah, so this hearing is about competition. It is not about technology or quality or reach, because we concede and have constantly maintained that the industry has done a very good job of rolling out and maintaining a high-quality network for Canadians. And to that extent, Canadians have received part of the public dividend for the resource. However, the industry has done so within a somewhat protective regulatory framework, which has allowed it, and particularly the big three national carriers, to undertake expansion within a very favorable economic model. Something, again, we believe was necessary to get the industry to where it is today. And while the big three have invested heavily with some risk, that risk has been mitigated to a large extent by the regulatory environment within which they operate. As such, the big three have been rewarded very well for their investment and their risk within a regulated environment, with rates of return that are staggeringly higher than other businesses in Canada. Returns that have not trickled down to regional and smaller players or to the Canadian public as yet. We cannot agree more with the Competition Bureau that market power, particularly at a wholesale level, is at play here and supports these rates of return. While the Bureau may have charts and graphs to support this notion, we have first-hand experience which transcends this data. The lengths that Bell and TELUS have gone to in order to keep us out of the wireless market are incredible, much of which have been documented in our current submission and our previous Part 1 application. I have to say, I was almost reassured when I heard several of the interveners over the last week or so state that they were similarly shut down, offer never even getting to the negotiation stage. I was equally reassured but equally angered when I followed the recent shenanigans between Bell and Videotron, where Bell unilaterally decided to issue a disconnect notice over purported abuse of roaming. Coincidentally, this is the same reason why they denied to provide us with roaming agreements, prompting our Part 1, even though we had no roaming at all. I used to think this is personal, and now I realize that this is endemic in the system. During these hearings, I've listened to the Commissioner's query interveners as to what constitutes the proper level of competition and the right price of service. As to the level of competition, in my opinion, because we are in a regulated environment, many of the normal competitive indicators may not apply. However, for me, the key indicator is the level of wholesale power. Regardless of the outcome of this consultation, as long as the national networks have the power to act as industry gatekeepers, competition will never be what it should be. There is simply no incentive to let anyone in, none at all. As to the right price of service, one has to only go to the public filings of the national carriers. At 45% plus EBITDA on wireless services, we don't have to go very deep to know that prices are too high, and hence the reason that the second component of this public dividend is not being realized by Canadians. Bell's intervention on this point last week was surprisingly honest. They need profits to maintain dividends, to maintain capital spend. So the most profitable company in the country needs to maintain the highest EBITDA in the country in order to invest in this industry, and they need the protection of the Commission to do so. TELUS, during its intervention, extolled the virtues of the level of taxes it paid to support Canadian society. However, in both cases, given the ubiquity of wireless service, lower prices puts money in the hands of Canadians, and I do not believe for a moment that moving their EBITDA from extraordinarily high to simply very high will significantly affect their investment decisions, but it will affect Canadians profoundly. So, to the key question of is there sufficient competition and are prices too high, We say go to their own data. And if you want to monitor this going forward, again, go to their own data. Annual reports are very telling. So what is the solution then? What is that balance between maintaining a modern, extensive, and robust Canadian network and providing this to Canadians at a realistic economic rate? The answer is not the status quo for all the reasons that we and many of the other interveners have already stated. And it is not the mandating of non-facilities-based MVNOs, which, again, we believe is a race to the bottom. It will inevitably spell the end of regional competitors and would be a short-term reward for not contributing to the development of the network. We agree with the Competition Bureau that the Commission should maintain its emphasis on facilities-based competition. However, it must create a regulatory framework which takes the wholesale market power away from the big three. We are much less concerned with retail power, as this component is not regulated, and we are confident that we can deal with this in our business model. And make no mistake, a small player like us has a major role to play in this industry. Small companies can be remarkably innovative and disruptive because we have to. We acquired 25 megahertz in the 850 megahertz cellular spectrum band through our acquisition of a small regional player that covers more than 10,000 square kilometers. This coverage is twice the size of the province of Prince Edward Island alone. This is our contribution, and we are committed to it. We are also committed to expansion in areas of little or no interest to other players, such as in the Alaska Highway, and have developed a very innovative approach to this very tricky implementation. You will not see this coming from the MVNOs, as there's no incentive to do this type of work. The ongoing development of small operators, such as ICE Wireless and TNW, can therefore add to the efforts made by existing disruptors to compete against the incumbents, all the while contributing to the national network. We really need to emphasize this point. And this is an important point. You don't have to build a national network to contribute to a national network, and you don't have to spend $1 billion. We certainly don't have $1 billion. On the other hand, mandating full MVNOs to telecom resellers would essentially translate to handing over customers to a web-based software operator that is taking no risk and making no investment to do so. This would compromise our existing investment, the value of our licensed spectrum, and would essentially undermine everything ISET has tried to accomplish. Mandating any regime where competitors can enter the market with little or no investment means they're entering with no financial risk, which will lead to a completely unlevel playing field. Again, why in the world would we buy and maintain spectrum under these conditions as a small company? On the other hand, given the proper environment, TNW looks forward to the next 3.5 gig auction to expand its services in the near future. But we need to have a clear path to do so. And as we said in our submission, the Commission's primary focus in this proceeding should be simply to lift the barriers that existing regional MNOs are still facing. Having stated what it is not, let's go on to what we think the solution is. And it is fairly simple in our opinion. A tweak rather than a reorganization. First and foremost, strike from the incumbent tariff the concept of permanent roaming as a restriction. Second, adjust in the same tariff the high wholesale rate by simply making it an existing retail minus a wholesale margin. This is the easiest method and one which cannot hide behind volumes of cost analysis, and it will auto-adjust over time. Third, add to the tariff mandated seamless handoff on reasonable terms, just as Bell, TELUS, and Rogers are already doing amongst themselves. Fourth, and this is very important to a small player like us, policies have to be firm and non-discretionary. Based on our experience, any opportunity for discretion will be used to hold back or delay implementation and will result in the Commission being asked to arbitrate situations that need no arbitration. And by the way, in our opinion, the simple fact that Bell, TELUS, and Rogers are teaming up exclusively to allow seamless soft handoff is a fairly good evidence of at least some level of collusion to the exclusion of others. We believe that these simple and easy changes will achieve the balance that the Commission seems to be looking for. Competition for Canadians, along with incentives to maintain the Canadian network. And they will not require endless, complex policies to be put in place. Canadians will finally be provided with a true public dividend for the resource. To the Commission, we appreciate this has been a long and intense journey over the last year, but for TNW Wireless, as the Commission is well aware, the journey to be able to compete in the Canadian wireless market goes back several years. This industry is at the crossroads, and TNW maintains its position, as stated in our submissions, that any decision to mandate full MVNO access will be a decision that will negatively affect the industry and Canadians for some time to come.
Any Canadian wireless regulatory environment must support the idea of a public dividend for a resource that belongs to Canadians. That dividend is a balance between cost of wireless services to the public and the quality and maintenance of wireless networks. Over the years, the Commission has sought to achieve the right balance through policy of promoting facility-based competition. While this policy has been very successful at achieving high quality and robust national network, it has prevented the realization of a financial dividend to Canadians. However, to date, the national carrier have realized higher than average profits. Much like the view of the Competition Bureau, we believe that the facility-based approach needs to continue, although it needs some tweaking to allow Canadians to more fully benefit from their resources. This requires policy that rewards long-term commitment by a regional player rather than regulatory backtracking. With the exception of the intervention of the potential MVNOs, we believe there's almost universal acceptance that moving away from facility-based competition would be highly detrimental to the industry and to Canadians. Now more than ever, it is important for Canada to facilitate the deployment of competitive networks by new disruptors, such as the regional and the smaller innovative MNOs like TNW, which have been committed to strengthening the national network. Canada needs strong competition that will bring affordability and innovation for years to come. Decision that provides short-term gain will not benefit Canadians in the long run. At the eve of the 5G era, Canadians cannot risk the return of the total supremacy of the Big Three. So to summarize, point number A, simplify the rule for accessing public right-of-ways and tower access. B, require implementation of soft seamless and-off between carriers that will result in fewer call drops and data session while improving user experience. As the Big Three acknowledge, a seamless handoff is technically feasible and is already actively provided between the three of them. C, remove definitely roaming restriction between mobile network operators. D, create a non-discretionary framework so the Big Three cannot delay entry and continue to be the gatekeepers of the industry so the Commission does not have to mediate meaningless dispute in this process. We are here to contribute and move forward, and we are committed to make this industry better. We will be pleased to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Commissioner Barrin.
Merci. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Trevor Deutsch and Monsieur Laliberté, for being here this morning, for your participation in this process, and for your oral presentation. I want to start today by learning a little bit more about your company. In your presentation this morning, you refer to your activities as a regional facilities-based competitor. And I understand you own and maintain spectrum. Can you clarify, are you actually providing cellular service yourselves today? Do you have any built-out infrastructure, towers, etc.?
Yes. So basically, we acquired a regional operators back in 2016. That infrastructure covers a portion of rural area in British Columbia and Yukon. We have 7-tower infrastructure right now. Obviously, we are operating in the 850 megahertz spectrum, the cellular band, the band 5. Obviously, we have been deploying that, changing and improving, upgrading that infrastructure for the past 2.5 years to maintain our operation, deploying a core network. But obviously, things have been paused because the moment that we have completed a transaction, the very first thing that we needed to complete a network deployment for our subscriber was to have the ability for them that whenever they were getting out of a reach of one of our tower was to be able to roam on Bell or Telus network, which was blocked at that time. So we have only friendly user on the network right now, and we are implementing the service as soon as we will be able to complete the interconnection with our roaming partner.
Okay, thank you. So I understand you have current clients that are taking advantage of the cellular service in the context of a broader service that you're providing, which I believe you call IPCS. Can you explain to the extent that this IPCS or a smartphone over IP wireless service uses the Wi-Fi infrastructure versus the wireless network?
So we have what I would so-called friendly user on the network right now. We're not going full commercial because we have the limitation that I just explained. We are eager to do so, and we will do so very soon. That said, yes, in order, basically, as probably you understand a bit the historic of TNW, which it's a long story that I think was well explained. Our part one, well described, and I will not take too much of your time to go back several years ago. We are operating as a CLEC. We're a bit paused on that portion of the wireline business, which was the natural move for us to go in wireless environment. We knew from the beginning that the industry of wireless services needs to be somehow reinvented. And everybody agree with that. Even the ILECs or the big three agree that GSM-based services, whether it's a 2G or 3G or 5G, it is the same technology than 35 years ago. It's the same technology. Nothing. It's just faster, better, less latency, much more throughput, but it's the same way of using it. So we have found that there's a lot of barriers to deploy a GSM-based service, whether it's a slow or very fast service. And therefore, we have now recently received our patent for the IPCS technology that's covered in North America. And we think that's going to change really the user experience and completely change the way of deploying the network. I don't want to enter in too much detail, but let's put it this way, very simple. As you saw in our various representation, basically it's a generic SIM system. So we're providing a SIM for our users. The IMSI in the SIM is obviously unique, but we call it generic because the registration to our core network is not based on the SIM and the QI code in it or into the MZ code. Is really based on the username and password. So it's a very small login-based service that creates the profile. So it's completely transparent for any kind of wireless service and any kind of devices, no longer using really a soft phone application. It's using the native 3GPP dial system, text system, and browsing system. The only difference is that you log into the service or you log out the service. So your username is what direct the profile that you're having. So when you log in with your username and your password, immediately the phone's going to register to the network with the phone number associated with that profile and with the data accessibility associated with that profile. You can log out from that phone, log with the same phone with a different username, and you're going to have a different phone number, a different text communication, and a different data usage. So that is the way we're deploying our service, and that's what we're putting on our network footprint right now.
Okay, I'm not sure I understood all of it, but thank you. So currently, I understand the service is available, and it's available in the U.S. and in Canada. I just would like to know, to what extent do you have a base in Canada of clients?
Well, the base came really at the original from our CLEC wireline business that was supposed to be offered automatically an access to our network. Like I said, it was paused for 2.5 years while we were debating in front of you our access to the roaming services, which at literally our end tied. So we have friendly user on the network right now, but we're not commercially promoting the service until we complete the interconnection with our roaming partner. We have a roaming agreement with a US partner that we have begun the interconnection test, but same as in Canada, we're a bit on the hold right now until we are able to finish and settle our problem with Bell and Telus.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I would like to get your views on the competitiveness of the Canadian wireless market in Canada. You've made some allusions to it in your presentation this morning, to the effect that you believe it's not competitive yet because prices are high and profits are high. However, there have been some significant changes in the market in the last 9 months. The introduction of the unlimited plans. Some of the MNOs have put in place mechanisms to reduce the overage charges. Do these recent developments change your position at all with respect to the competitiveness of the market?
Absolutely not. It's IPCS, and I don't want to come back on this concept, but it's going to redefine a lot of things for us. Obviously, we all know it's the big elephant in the room. The change have been done recently because of the current threat of this process, a little bit because of our threat for them for the past 2 years, and we can talk a bit about that a bit later if you want. But the idea, it's still too expensive. The reason is that there's no plan. IPCS bring a mix of prepaid and postpaid services where you really just pay per the megabyte that is being used. A phone call is translated in a megabyte. A text message is translated in a megabyte. Think about it this way, and I thought the presentation of Mr. Ness was brilliant. I mean, cell phone is a computer. It's no longer a phone. So that computer, you can buy it from a leasing company, you can buy it from the store of your choice, and you have plenty of way of communicating with this phone. A lot of over-the-top application is being used, a lot of access over Wi-Fi is being used. So really the 3GPP, if I may say, also the 4G infrastructure and soon the 5G infrastructure, really whenever you use it, just like a car, you pay for your gas, you pay for the kilometer that you're doing, the service should really be for the consumption that you're doing. Obviously, mobile network operators needs to kind of have a recurring amount of revenue with a minimum fixed amount of incomes to pay for the infrastructure. But really, there's a different way of doing that. It's just like put those computer devices at an affordable price and an affordable financing condition to the end of the consumer, give them a SIM that costs literally nothing, get them to register to your network, in our case to the IPCS network with a username and password, and you just pay per megabyte that you're using. And the price of megabyte should be the same price of megabyte that they're charging, that the MNOs, the large three, are charging to their own subscriber. And this way you have way much more flexibility, and your bill at the end of the month, in some cases, will be $6, $4, $12, $17.29. It's just because let them pay for what they use. Don't try to trap them with the $25 plan, and you're going to have X amount of megabyte. Then you're going to have some limit for the overage, etc. They just want to get recurring revenue that pay for their massive infrastructure and make them do a lot of profit. There's a way to bring the phone where they just pay pennies per megabyte. It's still going to be very profitable for mobile network operators, and it's a fair balance between us maintaining the network on a per megabyte or on a per gigabyte environment and permitting them to use what they really need. And this is where it's going to make a huge difference in every Canadian's pocket.
I just want to add to that on kind of on a macro level. I think no matter what the prices are, no matter what the plans are, if the big three are exerting wholesale market power, if they are the gatekeepers, there will never be the level of competition that there should be. I think you've heard over and over and over again companies that have gone and tried to strike deals and have been shut down. So no matter what they're proposing and what they're doing, it's never what it should be because they're deciding what that level of competition should be. It's not the marketplace. So I think, and again, we're in a unique environment here because our suppliers are our competitors in a regulated environment. This is not a straight supply and demand situation. It is a very unique situation. And I think in our submission, we said there is no regulated industry in Canada that's really quite the same. And there's no other industry that's quite the same. So as long as that wholesale power lies with the big three, competition will never be, no matter what it is, it will never be what it should be.
Thank you. So yes, pricing has been a topic that has been discussed at length in this proceeding. And I noted from your website, I understand that the service is not rolled out, but that you have that one rate plan, $10. Would you, given the technical aspects of your infrastructure, would you consider that plan is an equivalent for the low-cost plans that would be offered by other traditional carriers?
Yes and no. When we have introduced that plan to start with, it was a $10 plan with an X amount of megabyte to start with. As soon as we're going to be rolling out, that's no longer going to be the plan. The plan is purely on a per megabyte basis. So if we end up to be able to pay 0.045 cents US per megabyte, contrary to the 1.3, 1.4 right now, we're just going to take that price, properly mark it up, make sure that there's enough revenue and profit to maintain our network, pay for our infrastructure, and give a quality service to our subscriber that will have obviously the flexibility to move from a traditional 4G infrastructure, 5G future, or Wi-Fi. So really, that's going to be changed as soon as we're rolling out, as soon as the interconnection is completed with Bell and Telus. So that was just really because we were a bit handcuffed and we had no flexibility to offer something outside of wherever we have tower infrastructure. But that's going to evolve in what I just described to you.
Okay. And I just want to clarify that you really don't have any clients today on that plan. They're all in test mode?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on now to discuss the Competition Bureau's proposal, which I take you are in support of.
Partially. Partially.
Partially. Well, I can let you elaborate on that. The Bureau's model suggests that access be granted to regional facilities-based carriers only in areas where they have spectrum but have not yet built. Can I get your comments on that requirement?
Okay, that won't work. I respect the Competition Bureau, and they came with strong argument, and the study that they've done is brilliant. The effort that they have put into this is very useful. I don't think they ever built a wireless network themselves, whoever have put that report. The reality is, like, we have a network that covers 10,000 square kilometers. It's very rural. There's some critical areas, some small communities, but it's absolutely impossible for us to be able to build a strong and valuable network that we're going to make enough revenue to maintain and build this very critical infrastructure where there's zero coverage. Think about it, just the Alaska Highway that we're covering, it's 1,800 kilometers. There's 950 kilometers with no cell coverage on the only highway that covers both U.S. intercontinental states. Nobody have developed that, for example. So we're going to do it, along with all the community within that infrastructure. But it's just impossible for us to be limited to where we only have spectrum and expect that we're going to have enough client base within that big region that will be sometime outside of our coverage and be able to have and generate enough money to continue building this infrastructure. It's just not feasible. Like, there's no, Shaw would have very limited amount of ability to deploy itself if their own subscriber leaving the GTA is out of service, or if they were limited to only the spectrum that they have on very occasional basis. Videotron has the same problem. Eastlink had the same problem. So it's one country, it's one national network. Our clients are global. They're going from cities to city to province. They need to have a package or a service that they have no restriction. And for us, we really want to invest in where we have our infrastructure because it's profitable to do so. But we need to not have the boundaries that it's being suggested by the Competition Bureau.
I mentioned that I was before the Commission some 30 years ago, and actually it's quite apropos because it had to do with, I believe it was the licensing of specialty channels on the broadcast side. And there was a recognition by the Commission at the time that if you wanted a station like Omni to be up and running and to do what they were mandated to do, they still had to have the ability to show Happy Days to generate some revenue in order to keep that station afloat. So there is some precedent within the Commission to say, okay, we recognize you're a small company, we recognize you're going to do something very specialized, and we also recognize that you have to make money in order to accomplish that goal.
So would you suggest then that there be some kind of minimum threshold of investment or spectrum holding, or do I understand that your position is that any amount of spectrum should qualify for eligibility under the Bureau's
I
model?
think commensurate with the size of the company. I mean, we have a very large territory. We have very specific spectrum. I think we need national access in order to participate. I think that's the cost of being, and we are contributing. I keep saying we are contributing in our own way to that national network, especially in areas which is less desirable to some of the other carriers. So yes, I think we need, for our risk, our investment, our revenue model, I think we need that access.
And do you believe there should be any sort of investment threshold in terms of quantum?
We obviously, you have a really tough job. I would not want to be in your shoes, commissioners. I mean, you are going to be facing so much. I think we had the pleasure to listen to a lot of interveners, and the job's going to be difficult. Where's the balance? I mean, it's all a question of reasonableness, right? What is reasonable? Obviously, you have the one side of the spectrum is, why are we even here discussing everything is perfect, there's no problem, we want to keep statu quo? And you have the other side of the spectrum, which is like, no, wide open, like, let's go. $1 million will make it, and all of a sudden, overnight, we become a national operator. So this is really too extreme. What you have in the middle are the regional players, small and medium-sized regional players, who are just basically asking for something reasonable. If the Commission was to decide that we have 10,000 square kilometers to cover in the most unprofitable area to start with, that we still need to do because people need the service and we have a niche market there, then does the Commission's going to say we're going to allow you to operate without restriction on your roaming agreement? And I don't like to use the word MVNO for us. I don't like to use the fact that we would be an MVNO on other. I would like to the fact that we would be just roaming on our partner network. And if you were to decide that you're going to be allowed to have the same amount of square foot square feet to cover on somebody else's network, or we're going to impose you that you make the same amount of investment that you're going to be generating revenue on somebody else's network. We're going to leave it in your hand to decide what you think is reasonable. Please try to put yourself in our shoes and the amount of investment that we need to take and the amount of risk that we need to take and the years and years that's going to be taking for us to recoup that investment, if we ever. And we're relying on the fact that because we're contributing to the national network at a small scale, but it's one big network, and I can guarantee you that Bell, Telus, and Rogers will be very happy to have their subscriber have 900 kilometers worth of coverage when they're going to be traveling from Dawson Creek to Alaska. And in exchange of that, what will be permitted? To have our own subscriber when traveling Montreal to Toronto to also have the same coverage? Maybe that would be fair. I don't know. I think it would be easier, if I may respectfully make a suggestion to the Commission, whoever have infrastructure, wireless, and they're operating and they are investing, let us operate just like Shaw have this nationwide service. Videotron have a nationwide service. I was looking at the map of Shaw. Look at the country. Yes, just little spot over this huge country. And the map that they are advertising is a huge map, which is the Bell, Rogers, and Telus map. And same amount of square foot as us. You know, we are there, they're there in little areas. I think the entire country should be for all mobile network operators and infrastructure to offer a nationwide service so we can subsidize a portion of our costs with some additional revenue. Maybe in 5 years, you will want to review this and see if anyone took advantage of that, have not invested in their infrastructure, and end up to just piggyback on somebody else's network. But give us a chance to develop, and let's reevaluate in the near future and remove that privilege if any one of the less than a dozen small mobile network operator would have abuse of that privilege.
And don't forget, we do have minimum requirements set by ISET as our conditions of license. And those in themselves are significant. We have to maintain towers. We have to maintain a reach 50% of our population. That's already set. That's the baseline.
Thank you. I know there was a concern that was expressed over the course of the hearing about MVNOs and the ability of MVNOs to remain financially viable. So in order to avoid a situation where there were many players that entered the market and consumers would be potentially left in a difficult situation if some of those players were not able to be financially viable. There were suggestions made that potential MVNO players should be able to demonstrate a certain level of managerial, operational, and financial capability. One potential way that was suggested to do this was to give eligibility to companies that already have a minimum number of wireless subscribers. So, for example, 10,000. Would you agree with this position?
If the barriers that are mandated are lifted, or with the assistance of the Commission, which is on its way to be done, absolutely. I mean, we just had our end tied, and therefore we were not able to just do what we were supposed to do. But if we have a small leeway, just like from that day you have to achieve that threshold, now that all barriers for your conditions as what is mandated is lifted, and we have a small runway period to achieve that, absolutely.
Okay. Do you believe that there should be other factors that the Commission should take into consideration to ensure that potential MVNOs have the capacity to serve their customers responsibly?
I'm sorry, you're talking about MVNOs or regional MNOs?
MVNOs.
Sorry, please erase what I just said. Let's back up. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about regional mobile network operators like ExploreNet, Irstel, SSI Micro, or TNW. That's not what you're talking. Oh, no.
It's in the event that the commission decided to allow MVNO access, the eligibility criteria for MVNOs, we had some discussion about that, and the concern that we were trying to get your views on was how to ensure that any potential MVNOs would remain viable so that there would not be a situation where you had a lot of players entering the market and many of them not being viable.
Okay, our position is quite clear that we are not proponents of MVNOs. So for us to say, yes, it would be fine if they had a minimum standard, I think that would be contradictory to our position, which is we are saying they shouldn't. I don't know that I can go much beyond that other than any threshold when we're against the principle would not make sense for us to support. Yeah.
Okay. I think it applies as well to facilities-based regional players who would seek MVNO access. And the suggestion with the number of subscribers was as a way to ensure that the company has financial viability.
Well, I think financial viability is not a matter of subscribers. Financial viability is a matter of financial viability, and it's based on our cost structure. And as previous intervener said, we have to know what it is that we're going to be paying before we know what's viable and what we're going to charge. And so I think viability is a concern, obviously. I think one of the advantages that we have in this particular environment is not that it's a desirable outcome, but if a company goes under, it's fairly easy for customers to switch. They may lose service for a couple of days. I mean, we've seen a number of situations over the years where companies have not been viable, yet the transition has been not quite seamless, but the transition has occurred. I think that is part of normal business dynamics. I don't think it's a high risk to consumers, though.
Okay, thank you. You've also discussed in your oral presentation and in your submissions that the Commission choose a retail minus approach to setting the rates. How would you suggest the Commission implement that? Would it be applied to an average price? Would it be applied to the lowest in-market price? What are your views on that?
I was listening to Roger's presentation yesterday. Obviously, they will make it as difficult as possible for you to figure out exactly what they would like to be done, because they are introducing all those kind of, it's very clear, you know, you have X amount of megabytes, that's the plan, for X amount of months, and then they have this bonus that they're giving for an unknown period of time, and that bonus structure that they're giving is really in order for you to convince you that the price per megabyte is based on 10 gig at that price, but they're giving 5 gig free. That 5 gig free should not be accounted into the upcoming calculation of the retail price that will require a retail price minus. So it's to my point of view, I respectfully and humbly suggesting it's just like be reasonable and be fair. And what is that you're offering at the end of the day to your subscriber? The basic, the addition, the bonuses, the SOAR bonuses, there's a price per megabyte that they are advertising. And we need to be able to have something reasonable that we will be able, on our network, which is easier, and on our subscriber, just like Shaw is doing on their nationwide service, which is basically national price, they need to have an average where they will be able to offer very similar basic price, bonuses, SIR bonuses, etc., etc. So please don't fall into the trap of this concept of, well, really we don't expect the customer to really use all their gigabytes, so therefore our real price is not that much. Is whatever is advertised, whatever the user can really use up to the maximum during his month, should be the retail price that we define, including the bonuses, and you give us a reasonable profit margin to operate our business. That's really what we have to be careful of and to look for.
I think the key is we're trying to avoid a quagmire in front of the Commission. And for me, simplicity is always the best possible path if it's available. I find it interesting that some of the incumbents will come in front of you and say we're not making any money, but they'll get in front of their shareholders and say we're making a ton of money. Their annual reports show one thing, they say something else to the Commission. To me, anything that they offer published to their retail clients, it's immutable. It is there. It's not something that requires a ton of analysis. Again, the idea of discretion on the wholesale level, discretionary market power, we think is really difficult, and the Commission has seen that in the last year. Go back to the dispute between Videotron and Bell. One simple word in the Commission's guidelines, may instead of must, triggered a whole dispute between Bell and Videotron. You can't give them that kind of discretion. You can't. To me, transparency is really important.
Okay. So with respect to the rate then, you mentioned in your submissions that the rate should be subject to commercial negotiations, but you suggest that a negotiation backstop would not be feasible for small players. Can you clarify your position on commercial negotiations for the rate?
The commercial negotiation will not work. I'm not sure if, have we said that?
Yeah.
Commercial?
Well, it's at the backstop.
Okay, yeah, with a backstop. The thing is that we need to, the Commission needs to fix an absolute maximum rate per megabytes or per gigabyte. Voice and text is less relevant these days, but it would be important. We need to have something that is based on today's reality. I guess you can readjust it a little bit later in the time because more and more we're consuming data, less and less the price should be as networks evolve, obviously. But in 2020, I think the Commission should make the exercise, say, what's the current rate? What really Shaw and Videotron and Eastlink and TNW should be paying on a per megabyte basis if they don't want to be encuffed because the subscriber of Shaw will have more advantage to stay, of Rogers will have more advantage to stay with Rogers, even though they would be almost permanently in my area because they have so much economy of scale that my wholesale rate will be higher than the retail rate that they're giving to their subscriber. And we see that in our select business every day. So really, you have to make this exercise such as maybe they will be more careful at making these kind of temporary bonuses and a price only for 6 months to attract each other if they have to bear in mind that we have to be fair with all the other mobile network operators, if mandated. Therefore, they're going to be reluctant to introduce things that are, a bit crazy, that, well, they're going to have to pay for it for the wholesale portion to give the same kind of benefit to their ish competitor, and therefore keeping a level playing field that will permit us to compete at a reasonable level without fearing that we're going to, as often, paying more on the wholesale side than what they're offering on the retail side for their client.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk about niche markets. We've heard from several parties over the course of the proceeding that MVNOs would be better able to serve niche markets, niche segments of the market. Do you see any niche markets in the Canadian, the broader Canadian market that are currently underserved, in your opinion, that you believe you might be able to serve?
We think there are lots of niche markets that are being underserved because there are no niche markets that are being served. The plans are the plans. They're wide plans. I don't think they serve. There's no targeting of seniors. There's no targeting of students. There's no targeting of people who can't afford service, there's no targeting at all. It is a mass. It's a mass market because the incumbents are, that's the way they operate. I think that's something that we can address. We have a different business model. We don't have to make 45%. We're happy with less. We can target specific markets that are of just no attraction to the larger companies, and we're fine with that. I think we could probably go down to several niche markets that we haven't even thought of yet. They're out there.
If I may say so, the niche market is Canada. And the entire country is the niche market that is underserved right now. There's no way, Commissioner Barron, that you have to pay $40, $45, and $55 for an unlimited plan in Canada. There's no way you should be paying $35 for an unlimited plan. You need a computer, which is a smartphone, to operate on a daily basis. Whether you're going to use your over-the-top application, you're going to use any kind of email system, you can use any leasing company to buy your expensive $1,500 iPhone that you can pay $10 a month. You can just lease it. You don't need Bell. Bell is not a bank, nor Rogers. They don't have to finance your phone. Any company can finance it under very nice terms and conditions. So if your computer / your phone is financed by a real bank that's going to give you real advantage, then at the end of the day, what do you need your phone for? You are on Wi-Fi 80% of the time here, at your office, at home, in Starbucks. So you really need your 4G and your phone number to ring when you need it, most of the time on Wi-Fi, by the way, with the Wi-Fi-enabled calling. And therefore, you just should be paying on a per megabyte basis. And you're going to realize, Commissioner Barron, that at the end of the month, you will probably have to pay $11.72 for your phone. And the next month, you're using it a little bit more, you're going to pay $22 and $23. So there's no point of keep going down the path of Roger is your bank, they finance your phone, and you have to end them $40, $60 every month to be using a cell phone service that you will end up realizing that you don't need that much. And more, you will need it less and less, the 3GPP environment. So that's the revolution. And the niche market is actually everyone in Canada. That's the niche market.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I just have a couple more questions. I want to touch on the topic of seamless roaming. I know this is something that you advertise in your website, that your service is seamless in the way that it operates. Is seamless roaming something that you are interested in the context of the MVNO proposal?
MVNO proposal. And when you say MVNO,
Your MVNO proposal.
we're an MNO, but you mean if we were to use somebody else's network? Yeah, for sure. I mean, IPCS native service obviously use a over-the-top application, part of this overall technology. Seamless and over is not that important when we're using that portion of it. When we use the 3GPP, when we're using the 3GPP infrastructure, obviously seamless and over would be extremely useful for our subscriber. It's technically feasible. It's not that complex. It's not that expensive. We have experienced it over our own two-core network, which can essentially be considered as two MNOs. So it's not that complex. I think it would be very useful for our subscriber to have the ability to implement that in the near future.
Okay. Would you expect that there would be changes to the current wholesale roaming tariff if seamless roaming were included?
No. I mean, at the end of the day, roaming of services is roaming of services. The mobile network operator that would require Bell, Rogers, or Telus to have seamless and off would have to invest a bit in technical infrastructure, and therefore it's a resource for all operators, and we're going to be bearing the most of the infrastructure costs to implement that. And frankly, when they will have implemented naturally, whether it's mandated or not, for Shaw, hopefully in the near future, and for Videotron in certain environment, then it's going to be the same replication model for small operator like us. So at the beginning, the most of the cost is going to be our responsibility, and the rate should not be affected. Otherwise, it's going to become unmanageable. Like, which one had a call drop or a data session drop? I'm going to pay you 0.003 cents per megabyte because this one, the call dropped, and because this one did not drop, I'm going to pay you 0.00399. It would be unmanageable. I mean, they are a profitable company, and I think everybody should update their infrastructure to offer that service. And when they're going to have implemented for Shaw, they will be able to implement it for us. And it should be a no-brainer.
Okay. One last question then, again on the current roaming tariffs. Do you believe that the current definition of the roaming tariffs includes roaming on 5G?
Absolutely. The tariff is called GSM. It's a GSM-based roaming infrastructure. It's just an evolution. In the tariff right now, it's for GSM-based operator who are a member of the GSMA Association. And whether it's an HSPA or HPCA Plus, an advanced LTE Advanced, or any technology, our subscriber will be moving with the same devices across the country, and it's just a normal evolution. Again, I saw the presentation of the big three. They want to obviously prevent that, just like they want to prevent anything that will compete with them. But 5G is a natural evolution, and again, it's going to become very difficult to manage if you were to restrain the technology that we would be able to roam on. It's just going to be unmanageable. And yes, so the answer is, we should keep it as is. It's a GSM-based environment, and 5G should be included just like the 4G and the 3G roaming services.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much for your answers to my questions. I don't have any further questions. I will pass it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members may have something, but I have a couple of quick follow-ups. You've mentioned a couple of times now that you should have seamless handoff as the big three do between themselves. I don't know if you were listening to the proceeding earlier. We asked Vice Chair Leisner. I promoted you. Are you happy? I just said Chairman Leisner. Vice Chair Leisner asked Bell pointedly if they had seamless handoff, and the answer was a clear no. Mr. Bibick said they do not with Rogers, and the arrangement with TELUS is that they share a RAN network, but they operate separate cores, and there is no handoff as each is operating their entire network over the RAN. So you've said they do. Can you just speak to that, please?
Well, our experience is with Bell and TELUS that absolutely they are going to on the home public mobile network core. They are switching what we have experienced and test, that they are seamlessly switching between subscriber whenever the radio of TELUS would be have congestion. We saw that the phone changed literally to the frequency of Bell, and the call was not dropped. So technically speaking, it is a soft and off to a certain extent.
Or a shared RAN network.
Well, a shared RAN network will not permit a change of registration to a core in the same cell tower. So that's what we saw. There was a change in the core on the same cell tower. So I don't know if there's another magic that they're pulling behind the scene that we're not aware of, but for us, it was very clear that it was an indication of a seamless handoff.
And you've said the same of Rogers. On what do you base that?
Well, Rogers and Videotron add something similar to what we saw in terms of, when we were getting out of a Videotron coverage area, the session was not dropped. So again, I'm not exactly sure how this was possible, but for us, it indicated that it was a soft end off. Maybe there's another technicality that was implemented that it's not exactly that, but that's what we are foreseeing between them.
Thank you. I just want to be sure I completely understand your proposal. So you've indicated that you want to see the roaming tariff amended to remove the prohibition on permanent roaming. I understand that. Following that, under your proposal, would you be allowed to market your service outside of your network's footprint? I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I just want to be clear.
It's a tricky question. Obviously, our primary focus is to serve our communities and our area. But unfortunately, the force of the nature, we need to offer a nationwide service which will be sold over the internet, and therefore trying to restrict subscriber based on their postal code or based exactly on which limit they are offering, it would be difficult for us and it would minimize our ability to invest and reinvest and generate revenue. So the answer is...
That's a yes.
That's a yes, because we have no choice.
Okay.
Can I just...
But maybe I can add to the question, and then
Sure.
and then you can add it, and you can respond in a more fulsome way. I'm just struggling a little bit with the notions about incentive to invest. You've commented on MVNO's lack of incentive to invest in anything. Arguably, there'd be a lack of incentive to invest by you or others in your situation if your customers are roaming everywhere. You're deriving revenue from there. What's the incentive for you to keep building and investing in facilities in your licensed territory?
Okay. First of all, in some cases, there is a business model for us to do this. We've looked at Alaska Highway. There is a business model, although it's tight. We have mandatory requirements to invest. And this is going to be partly up to the Commission is to set what it is that we need to do in order for the privilege to participate in the market. I think that, I listened to the intervention of Bragg last week, and he was, I can't remember his first name, but Mr. Bragg was saying that in some markets, he has to get 50% of the market share just to break even. I mean, we're in a tiny little market. We have obligations, which we're meeting our obligations. Can we get 50% of that market in order to break even? I don't think we can. I think, again, going back to my broadcast model, we have obligations, we know what we want to do, but we have to be able to make sufficient revenues to be able to implement our business plan. I think there are some unique situations when you're in a rural, we're not in a big city. We are in a rural environment, and we need an incentive to be able to make money.
But to be clear, you did take on those obligations knowing that permanent roaming was not permitted.
Fair enough. But then the question is, why is ISED even selling spectrum to small companies? We are here because of these questions, and that's a very good question. Nobody else wanted to be there when we had the spectrum. TELUS was not in even anywhere near some of the areas that we had. Now they are starting to go into it.
I just want to.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please finish. I apologize for interrupting. Just going back to your territory again, you indicated I assume you mean your licensed territory covers something like 10,000 square kilometers. What percentage of that is covered by a radio access network? Obviously, it's much smaller, but how small is your actual radio access network coverage?
So we have 7 towers under operation. So our spectrum is really on the Pacific coast, on the area of, our map is on our website, but it's in the area of Iroquois Island, on the coast, in the area of Bella Bella. So there's the up north of the island of Vancouver, and the other big portion is from Dawson Creek to Beaver Creek, which is the border of the Alaska Highway. So just that stretch is around 1,800 kilometer by 20 kilometer wide, and there's village and communities and Indian bands communities all around that area.
Roughly what percentage of your territory is covered by your radio access network?
Currently, probably 10%.
Thank you. So let me give you an example. I'm not speaking of your business model, but let me give you a hypothetical one. And just tell me if you think there would be a concern. So let's say an entrepreneur wants to seize a resale, an MVNO opportunity in a major city. We'll just say Vancouver. But they either don't want to or don't believe it's economic to go and try and seek spectrum, which wouldn't surprise me. But instead they find an isolated area where they can obtain spectrum or sub-licensed spectrum, we'll say in northern Quebec. Pick it, doesn't matter where it is. And you go and you obtain a small amount of spectrum and you put up a tower, 2 towers, whatever is required to fulfill the ISED obligations. And with the sole purpose of operating an MVNO to sell service in Vancouver, because that's where you believe you can make some money. Is that a appropriate model in your view, or and should it be allowed?
Chairman Scott, we completely understand your question, and we have been asked the same question.
And I'm not talking about. I'm trying to give the hypothetical so that we can make it a very sort of black and white.
We have been asked this and wrestling with that, and you're absolutely right. First of all, I don't know how much spectrum is even available in this country at this point to be purchased. We had experienced that there's not a lot, even though you want to deploy it. And yes, you're right. I mean, it would not. You cannot obviously allow anyone to purchase any kind of, if there's any available. I'm not suggesting there's any, by the way, but purchase a small, tiny little amount of spectrum somewhere just to be part of a club and all of a sudden be able to operate national network. That's obviously something it's trying to do indirectly what you would not be able to do directly.
But I think that was the essence of Commissioner Barron's question when she was asking about, is there some criteria, a minimum, and if so, what could it be? That's where I'm heading with this example.
First of all, I said I have very strict rules about maintaining compliance into a license. So already, in order to operate a network and maintaining compliance, there's a certain amount of things and on condition that you need to meet. But if there's investment to be made, if there's annual commitment, target to achieve in terms of how many subscribers we're getting within that footprint, we will be delighted to hear any kind of proposal from the Commission to saying, we want to make sure that we maintain the incentive to invest in our infrastructure. And in order to maintain that incentive, we have the privilege of being a mobile network operator. So if we don't have necessarily that number or the exact formula, but we will be absolutely delighted to participate or make further submission about what might be those kind of minimum commitment that needs to be maintained to serve the underserved in rural area to maintain the status of a mobile network operator.
Thank you.
I think the alternative is that if there's not a financial incentive for outlying areas, I mean, we won't buy spectrum. Small companies won't buy spectrum. I think that it's a little bit self-defeating. And again, going back to ISED, why would they be? It really will become the big players only that will be buying spectrum because they can cross-subsidize. In essence, if TELUS were to buy our spectrum, they could lose money because they can cross-subsidize it with Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto. That's the reality. We don't have that opportunity and that privilege to cross-subsidize unless we have some ability to move outside our restrictions. And going back to the Omni model, if you want to serve specialty and niche and areas of need, companies like us have to have some sort of a business model to make money, and we're prepared to do things that other companies are not prepared to do. This is, and I appreciate your wrestling with the balance, and as you can tell, my approach is always, what is the balance? And I don't have the magic wand. I can tell you that I was recently in South Korea, and I saw the benefits of an amazing network where I'm in a taxi cab, and the cab is streaming movies in the back seat because it's data is plentiful. I was also just spent 3 weeks in India, where I would say that is a perfect example of the race to the bottom. Rates are incredibly affordable. I mean, staggeringly affordable. Yet you can't get LTE service outside of metropolitan areas, and you get dropped calls. I would say every third call is dropped. So they have the balance on the other side. They have very good rates. They have very marginal service. So what is the balance? We've given you our perspective. And I think, listen, I hope you come up with the answer, because we know what we want to achieve. We have a rough idea how to achieve it, but we don't have the answer.
Well, we will come up with an answer. The answer is,
Okay.
I'm not sure about. Members, any other questions? Thank you very much.